Hi, welcome to the History Workshops webinar for today. We're very excited to have Professor Luvuyo Wotshela, who will be speaking on the topic from afflicted Black local authorities to integrated and contested municipal system, 2 decades of civic action and governance realignment in the Border Kei's Eastern Cape, South Africa, 1985 to 2005. I'll just read a quick bio of the prof. I'm sure lots of you on this call know Professor Wotshela, have read his work, but for those who are unfamiliar, I'll just read his bio. Dr. Luvuyo Wotshela is professor and the head of National Heritage and Culture Studies Center at the University of Port Hare. He is the author of the books Capricious Patronage and Captive Land, A Socio-Political History of Resettlement and Change in South Africa's Eastern Cape, 1960 to 2005. Which was published in 2018. And he's also the author of Fort Hare, From Garrison to Bastion of Learning, 1916 to 2016, published in 2017. The prof will be speaking on his more recent research about local government in the Eastern Cape, and just a couple of housekeeping things. Firstly, this session is being recorded. The recording will be shared on the History Workshops YouTube channel after this. And secondly, if you have any questions during Prof's presentation, please feel free to type them in the chat. We'll collate them at the end and either ask you to come on if you want to speak, but also after the 20 minutes presentation, we will have a discussion. So looking forward to a very stimulating session. This is a very timely topic, so I think lots of us are excited. And the last thing I'll ask people to do is please keep your cameras off, just to help people whose bandwidth is low. Without further ado, I'll hand over to Prof.
Thank you very much. I have been experiencing a bit of an unsteady network. So with your permission, I am going to switch off the video, but I'm sharing slides and I do hope I'm quite audible for the rest of the audience. Let me start by extending an appreciation to the Vets History Workshop and certainly to believe as a hidden history theme is within the spirit of what the History Workshop endeavors to do. I have already pre-circulated a draft paper, so I'll only deal with an abbreviated version for this afternoon talk, which, as indicated, deals with the 2 decades of civic action and local governance realignment in the Border Kei region of the Eastern Cape. For the benefit of the map, which points to this region during the epoch under investigation, Border Kei covers the Ciskei, adjacent border districts, and partly western Transkei. These are historic terms. Ciskei west of the Kei River and Transkei east of the same river were used from the 19th century to refer to largely African-occupied areas either side of the Kei. That stage of conquest during the second half of 19th century, political marker within an ever-shifting frontier. Fast forward then to the 1970s, both Transkei and Ciskei turn out to be models for homeland policy within eastern reaches of the Eastern Cape province. Transkei in particular, where chieftaincy survived conquest, was already geographically consolidated, about 45,000 square meters that stretched to the Natal border. In fact, this map is sort of deceiving you because the rest of the Transkei is not there. I'm just focusing on the western part of it. Transkei would be almost nearly 3 times bigger as what you are seeing on the screen. Transkei also housed many rural families and migrants whose local authority was established under conservative but influential chiefs. Small educated elite were either entrepreneurs who benefited from homeland consolidation or civil servants, or those who worked for Transkei government of an ambitious Kaiser Matanzima, who also was the leader of the Transkei National Independence Party that accepted a spurious independence in 1976. By contrast, African areas within the Ciskei, which you see as kind of main in this map, remain discrete, and that was rapidly remapped and merged to about 11,000 square kilometer homeland during the decade of the 1970s, at the same time as Transkei had accepted independence. Chieftaincy in this area in the Ciskei was obliterated during conquest, but then reintroduced through the National Party government's Bantu authority system. Land which became attainable through consolidation became tool of retribalization and creation of tribal authority benefiction, as the homeland was also a recipient of many relocated families. Thus, the remapped area of the Ciskei fell under the rule of Lennox Sebe and his Ciskei National Independence Party. So I'm going to jump straight then. What constituted first phase of civic movement to transitional local government leading to 1995? By early 1980s, when Sebe's Ciskei also accepted phony independence, the apartheid government was determined to complete Ciskei consolidation by clearing African areas from adjacent white corridor farming border districts. This white corridor from coastal East London stretching to Queenstown northwardly had several historic African areas, often referred to as black spots because of their unsuited location and their locality within what was deemed white South Africa. Some, like those within the Ciskei, were private properties held under registered title deeds. Their planned relocation coincided with high publicity against forced removals, and there is amply literature on that subject. They became highly mobilized to contest proposed removals, which concurrently, whilst concurrently they rejected Ciskei tribal authority system and homeland policy. In that process, they formed highly mobilized resident association, which launched an initial civic movement phase that even preceded the beginnings of the UDF in 1983. The artificial nature of the Ciskei also meant that it interfaced and was influenced by politics and dynamics from highly populated adjacent centers of East London, which was still within white South Africa, as well as Queenstown, that too under white South Africa in the north. And this linked to parts of, especially Queenstown linked to parts of Western Transkei. Also, many people from the Ciskei and to some extent in the Transkei worked in the East London King Williamstown industrial zone. Earlier mining and industrial migrant routes from the North provinces were slowly declining after mid-1980s. So from these homelands, industrial decentralization plans grew hubs in places. They are quite familiar names you may have read about: Dimbaza, Fort Jackson near East London, and also Butterworth in Transkei, just east of the Kei. and also around Queenstown. So successful resistances of black spots against removal to Ciskei overlapped with such routes. They also linked with the border township contests against the black local authority system, which the National Party state introduced via a 1982 legislation and continuing throughout the 1980s. And that endeavor was to reform local authority through elected town and village councils to win a new African clientele. But those councils were vehemently rejected in that course of township-driven insurrection. The border district's black spots already gone through combustion in the early 1980s, and that rural and urban kind of connection then sort of swelled. And it was naturally buttressed, of course, by the advent of the Border Civic Congress in 1987, which instantly was embraced by the UDF. By now, earlier facets of organization had shifted onto the Ciskei inland, where some alienated communities in the course of redistribution of resources also challenged the tribal authority system as part of democratization of their governance. So by the late 1980s, that Border Civic Congress, known as BOCO, essentially coalesced growing actions of protests from Ciskei rural villages and townships, those of adjacent border districts, and from parts of the Western Transkei around Queenstown, and even linking that Butterworth East London axis. Following the National Party's government's unbanning of political movements and a switch of Ciskei leadership from SEDE to that of a military dictatorship of Gozo and the start of CONTRALESA talks, the fate of Ciskei particularly hung precariously, especially in the early 1990s. And when the omnipresent South African National Civic Organization, known as SANCO, absorbed that earlier structure of BOCO and its resident associations, remobilization pace entwined with liberation movement, and these overran the tribal authority system within the Ciskei. Of course, victory in the first democratic election of 1994. But local administration in this homeland and outlying areas that made the Border Kei an essential role for the reconfigured local government model. So local government elections that were held there of course, they were going to drive that endeavor. Just nationally, of course, the elections in 1995 were initially held in 8 provinces out of 9, because KZN was seen to be a problematic area. There was still uncertainty about chieftaincy there, and as such, the elections were delayed until 1996. But what the elections did then, within existing urban municipal zones, the new membership of transitional local councils, known as TLCs, was decided through proportional representation. And these were dominated by that SANCO and the ANC-aligned candidates were to perform transitional administration functions. Regarding the elected rural local authority in particular, there was initially, as indicated, uncertainty on that prospect of chieftaincy. And the case of KZN, of course, has got to be highlighted here. In the end, the ANC government regarding rural local government offered a district model for rural areas that comprised demarcated district council at sub-regional level and options for provisions at local village level. As in urban areas, Such transitional rural councils, or referred to as TRCs, were seen to be intermediary. Importantly, that model offered participation of white farmers in local governments and was also made palatable to chiefs or traditional authorities by offering them ex officio positions. And this, of course, was a major concession by the ANC, given the earlier resistance to that institution, and of course was impelled not only by the KZN situation, but the presence of an ANC-aligned CONTRALESA that had emerged since the late 80s. It had effectively become platform for re-emergence of chiefs and relics of the tribal authority system by early 1990s, and serving as a counterweight to popular SANCO formation within the TRCs. Its presence was felt in some provinces, and in the Eastern Cape particularly, was boosted by an institution of a House of Traditional Leaders in 1996, even with no clarity of powers of such a house. So my next slide is going to look slightly beyond that 1995, really. So meanwhile, then, the integration of Ciskei and Transkei homelands with the white farming areas, as I've indicated, had strengthened the ANC's grip on emerging district council as it secured majority votes in 1995. So essentially, the heartland sub-regional councils that earlier served white border districts around East London and Queenstown now had command to include outlying former homelands of the Ciskei and essentially the Western Transkei around Queenstown. And the transitional local government for the ANC was a vehicle for reintegration and control of these hitherto segregated precincts, as much as it was to coordinate development and services. The ruling party had concurrently passed the 1995 Development Facilitation Act, expecting synchronization of departmental functions for development resolves under elected transitional councils. Yet there was no formulated local government approach to development. Other challenges to both the TLCs and the TRCs related to their empty revenues, as many townships had used non-payment of whatever charges as part of a resistance model. Parallel development challenges began to test transitional local government, of course, beyond 1995. And in this Border Kei region, complex set of questions raised by political and social circumstances surrounding land demand and spread of subserviced informal settlements remain palpable. These, of course, were relics from failure of both the Transkei and Ciskei especially, and even though the region had land-serving NGOs which often mobilized vulnerable communities, such organs now barely survive to facilitate development with limited resources. So these challenges persisted, especially for the reintegration of the region. And this, of course, extended to other sort of topics, and they related to the imminent shape and servicing of human settlements for the poor, their institutional arrangements, and they related to agrarian activities, as there were fears for the direction of commercial agriculture in the region amidst sprawling informal settlements. There was still confusion again regarding the role of traditional authority on rural land development, even though traditional authority was part of the concession and sitting holding ex officio position within the TRC model. And that problem lacked until at least the second premier of the province of the Eastern Cape, Makenke Stofile, whom I'm sure you know, approved a 1997 legislation on regulation of development and denied power for traditional institutions. That, however, changed within 3 or so years when, in fact, within 5 years, when the Traditional Leadership and Governance Framework Act allowed the traditional institution and its councils into a revamped post-2000 integrated municipal model. Clearly at that stage, in other words, after 2000, the ANC state felt the weight of CONTRALESA and its broader concession to traditional authority widened contested space and authority within municipal functions, especially between elected local government formations and unelected traditional councils. I'm heading towards conclusion. So simultaneously, the ANC government had just before sort of elevating traditional authority, had revamped the transitional local government via a 1998 legislation. And in this sort of new arrangement, district municipalities that were all-encompassing local municipalities that were wall-to-wall had to be sort of rationalized. I've got a sort of a map here which gives you an idea of what happened after 2000. The district municipalities I'm focusing on are these ones that are highlighted, and you can just see local municipalities that are inside them, averaging roughly about 5, sometimes even 6. And these were quite big district municipalities, of course, covering, as I've indicated, Ciskei, part of that Border Kei districts, and parts of Western Transkei. And after the year 2000, the Eastern Cape was divided into 6 district municipalities and 38 local municipalities. In fact, the whole Eastern Cape, there you can see it's covered, and it's only metropolitan with population of well over 2 million, and a major industrial area was the Port Elizabeth and Unique area, now renamed Gqeberha and Karega, just with, as I said, population of just over 2 million. And East London also became an autonomous Buffalo City municipality. Just as a recap in one last minute, as I'm finishing, I'm going to go back to that 4th slide. Both the district and especially local municipalities in this new arrangement, they carried the task of reintegrating what were essentially areas of white South Africa and homelands of Ciskei and Transkei. That task also became a major headache, as most municipalities, which were also compelled via a 2002 legislation to produce integrated development plans as prerequisite for accessing state funding for development, struggled even more. And these 2 district municipalities that I have shown you, Chris, Honey, and around Queenstown, which is the top sort of blue one, and Amatole, the one that's gray around East London, relied on usually financially inadequate and poorly resourced local municipalities in their endeavor to drive integration of former homelands into this new model. And it was clear by 2005 that the integrated municipal system structure was not working, albeit so much had been invested on it. Patently, contestation of power had widened as traditional council within municipalities also continued with unfettered dispensing of rural resources, effectively expanding uncontrolled and unplanned human settlements. And such contested power or confusion regarding authority on rural development would continue even beyond the period I am investigating, which ends with 2005. I think I am going to stop there. I may have done it just under 20 minutes. Thank you very much for listening.
Yeah, thank you so much, Prof. A very fascinating presentation. If you don't mind stopping your screen sharing.
Okay, I'll do that now.
All right, thank you. Okay, let me see if there are questions. Okay, while we wait, my screen is weird today. So while we wait for people, oh, Joel has a, I was pretty sure Joel would have a question. So or five. So I'll let Joel ask his question.
Thanks a lot. Yeah, as Kasonde said, Prof, I was very excited to see the title of this presentation because essentially I'm doing the same thing, but looking at a municipality in Limpopo over the same period, in fact, understanding the kind of amalgamation politics and the role of the civics in creating the kind of foundation for it. I'm just wondering if you could reflect a little bit more about what you found the kind of trajectory of SANCO activists after 95 was, and their role in the municipal councils. You know, the story usually told is one of just co-optation that the ANC, that civic activists sort of folded into ANC politics. But I'm wondering whether you see any sense of kind of the civic struggles being transferred into that new arena in a way. And then maybe to understand, you know, so what happens to those civic activists? Where do they end up in the TLCs, but also after, you know, in the amalgamated municipalities? And then another question just about the role of the TLCs more broadly from what you're seeing. You know, you say that it's a vehicle for combining segregated areas, which is very much what, you know, we found too. And I wonder what the political dimensions of that was. You know, like what were the kind of, because you mentioned in your article that it played a strong political role in the sense that it was this insurrectional epoch, which I think is something missed often when we think about the limits or possibilities of the transition. So, you know, in the municipality I'm looking at, it was very much about trying to create a working environment with former ardently segregationist, you know, Conservative Party councillors. So I'm wondering what sort of social compacts or new political compacts had to be made, yeah, in the TLC. Okay, I'll leave it at that. But yeah, very much excited about this work. Thank you so much.
Right, thanks, Joel. Since we don't yet have any more questions, Prof, would you like to tackle those?
Oh yes, thanks, Joel. Very fascinating questions, and I'm actually learning as you're asking too. Let me just start with the primary one. What happens with SANCO after 1995 and the trajectory? Then it's very interesting because the kind of ubiquity nature of SANCO too, the various kind of splintering directions. But what I probably just need to highlight here, the key individuals who contested that transitional elected government TRCs or even TLCs in 1995, most of those SANCO members moved into either a sort of a municipal official kind of positions. Others remained as kind of councillors. at more localized sort of organizing sort of levels, and quite a number of those, the latter that I've mentioned, in a way they tended to be overshadowed too by, of course, now the re-emerging transitional, should I say, traditional sort of councils, especially in areas where CONTRALESA became quite strong, in parts of Transkei and Ciskei. What I find quite interesting, some of these traditional councils being very, very effective in sort of, in a way, influencing even aspects of land development within rural areas, dispensing land, even albeit not so coordinated with municipalities, but because traditional council seem to be carrying a bit of weight around the traditional authority, that seem to sort of overshadow what used to be SANCO individuals who have become councillors in those rural entities. Around small towns or even kind of urban areas, SANCO sort of carried a little bit further, albeit even there, SANCO sort of lost its shape. SANCO's strength, actually, I would say, probably was the 1990s leading into the integrated municipal system, which kicks in from 2000 and moving forward. Once some of those individuals are absorbed as either municipal officials, and some actually held very significant positions in those municipal or integrated municipal structure model, which became a post-2000, either as mayors of integrated district municipalities or even local municipalities, others becoming municipal managers, and others holding key sort of portfolio kind of other positions. And SANCO, in a way, kind of fizzled completely out. They still SANCO, people still speak about SANCO even now, beyond 2005, but it's not as robust as it was during that epoch of 1990s and just beginning of 2000. And then you had the second question, which I'm not sure if I got it correctly, which was more on the political dimension of the TRCs. Did I get it right, Joe?
Yeah, sort of, I'm just wondering, you sort of make the argument that the developmental agenda sort of went into the background. And
yes.
That in fact the TLCs were almost in a way mostly a political. And I'm wondering how that chimes with the kind of civic, many of those activists came with an explicit agenda around, say, improving service delivery or whatever it was.
Okay, all right, now I got it. Yes, the tragedy of the transitional local government, as I read it, the transitional local government entity of 1995, there wasn't a well-formulated kind of development framework, even though the ANC had passed that 1995 Development Facilitation Act with an endeavor to have these TRCs sort of coordinating what I would say departmental sort of functions or government departments into coordinated developmental strategies. But that was a disaster. It never happened. In fact, my understanding that Development Facilitation Act of 1995 ended up also being absolutely delegislated by 2000 because they realized that these TRCs and TLCs were incapable of coordinating development, even though theoretically the ANC government felt they should do so. Now, the interesting thing is, if you look at the model which they introduced from 2000, of course, integrated municipal system or whatever it's called. The emphasis, of course, is these integrated development plans and even having specific departments within municipalities running that kind of entity, and either district or local municipalities being warranted to develop these integrated development plans in order even to lever subsidy or funds from government departments to push development. So the endeavor was there, but there are quite a number of still challenging factors. As I've sort of sensed in the district municipalities I've looked at, there was not even full sense of awareness of more sort of localized, specifically challenging aspects that needed to shape those kind of integrated development strategies. So much that these municipalities endlessly were relying on either consultants to frame or develop these IDPs for them, which were just being used sometimes as a kind of a marketing tool rather than more kind of a more I would say methodical integrated development strategy. So I see that as still a major challenge. I wouldn't be able to pronounce well beyond 2010, but as I'm beginning to interview most people who have been involved right up to 2005, where I stopped, it's still an endeavor that was theoretically within the integrated municipal thinking, but it never took off.
Wow, yeah, very fascinating discussion, Prof. I think Stefan's question in the chat kind of builds the conversation from there. I'm going to read it, and then if Stefan would like to, after you respond to it with clarification, I'll come back. I'll let Stefan turn on his mic. But the question is, thank you so much for this talk, Prof. Wotshela. I have learned a great deal, and I'm continuing to learn about this history, about the Border Kei from the discussions. My question, in the creation and jurisdictional merging of the local and district municipalities, was there an aim for the integrated wall-to-wall municipal system to balance wealthy and poor areas from revenue sharing perspectives? And if so, has that aim been successful? I suppose I am interested in where officials chose specifically to draw municipal lines.
Very interesting question.
Yeah, so if you could just comment on that, and maybe Stefan has follow-up questions.
Yeah. Well, thanks, Stefan, for the question. I would probably, I mean, look, I don't know if I can still bring the map, but just have that map of the integrated municipal system I shared. I don't know if I can bring it there, but anyway, let me just say, the whole kind of discussions, of course, was integrated municipalities will have to deal with the pools of poverty. Remember the big manifesto of the ANC's national elections in 1999, pushing the whatever they call the boundaries of poverty, and municipalities being seen to be very critical in that endeavor to coordinate and deal with the pools of poverty. But unfortunately for the Eastern Cape, I would say that prospect could be feasible by and large on areas that were not landlocked within the former homelands. Transkei itself, as I've indicated, a 45,000 square kilometer has got roughly about 2 or 3 of these district municipalities, which I'm not even focusing on the talk for today. And I would say 2 of those are one called OR Tambo, which is absolutely, I mean, the problems that I am defining today, especially regarding rendering services and aspects of financial crisis regarding municipalities, this is just a pay. Because they are within what was a landlocked, very poor sort of former Transkei, and there the endeavor which Stefan asked about, realigning the kind of wealthy and poor revenue stroke resources couldn't be sort of feasible. I mean, you're talking areas on the other side of Mthatha, stretching to those small towns, Gumbu, Mountfrey, Mount Olive, and some, of course, as I said, splitting OR Tambo District Municipality and Alfred and so right up to Mount Olive. That attempt to realign wealthy and poor, ironically, wealthy and poor revenues, ironically could work in the area I'm looking at, in the sense that you had very successfully run small towns within what was the White Corridor and being merged in the close proximity of the Ciskei and parts of the Western Cape. Sorry, the Western Transkei, not Western Cape, Western Transkei. And to a certain extent, those areas orbiting around East London and East London, working with other areas like Butterworth in Transkei could be feasible. But I think the other key challenge here, that wall-to-wall thing, or wall-to-wall coordination of municipalities, I think was left by and large on the hands of local municipalities that tended to be even poorly resourced than district municipalities. And they're facing even deeper challenges. And as such, even those where there have been attempts to realign what were previously wealthy and poor sort of revenues, they ended up dragging those who were actually surviving into the kind of negative, very precarious kind of sides. And most of those local municipalities within the border now, Amahlati around Stutterheim, that's a very interesting area, used to be a well-functioning municipality, now is deemed to be in financial crisis, and that was a factor from 2005 moving forward. So that realignment, it dragged even those that were previously well-resourced into more negative terrains. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Yeah.
Yeah, Stefan, are you happy? Do you have?
No, that makes a ton of sense. And it sounds like the imperatives for territorial coherence and the urban-rural inequalities were outweighing, in some sense, desires for geographical equity. But the border region in particular seems like an interesting case. Yeah, that's fantastic.
Certainly.
Yeah. All right. Great. So there are a couple of questions, and I think more of a comment from Professor Alan Mabin. So I'll read the question. The first question is from Tim Gibbs. I remember you giving a cracking paper many years ago about the growth of informal settlement on the edges of small towns and how this played into the late apartheid crisis and the growth of the civic movement. How do you feel these urbanization trends played out politically after '94? Many thanks. And from Dr. Ali Hongwane, how are the roles always competitive between the elected councillors and so-called izinkosi mediated in the area you are studying? I think we'll get back to Prof. Mabin's comment.
Very quickly on that, yes, Tim has reminded me about this paper. Part of that paper actually went to the book Capricious Patronage and Captive Land. And interestingly, there I was actually looking on the epoch of the 1990s and SANCO particularly, with its more omnipresence, the kind of power and in overrunning what used to be the former homeland sort of tribal authorities, was able to mobilize people around resources like land, invasions and sprawling settlements around the edges of homelands and small towns. As SANCO was actually imposing itself a very popular sort of semi-urban stroke rural voice at that time. And that changed the face of small towns in the Eastern Cape. And this now, if you travel the Eastern Cape, they have been by and large recipients of what you can call low-level housing schemes, sometimes popularly known as kind of RDP sort of housing. So that's the comment back to Tim, and thanks for bringing that back. And back to Dr. Hongwane, yes, it's a very important aspect in this particular region, and more so where used to be the mainland of Ciskei and Transkei. Yes, traditional councils have become influential, and they are playing very sort of decisive roles on other aspects, especially, as I've indicated, reallocating land and expanding even settlements that are hardly planned by these integrated municipalities. There are interesting cases on a slightly different aspect from what I've presented today, on what you can call privatization of what used to be communal, I would call communal former homelands, sort of agricultural resource land. And what you see now, you see these very fleshy upmarket sort of houses that are sprawling and developing on the edges of main routes, expanding on the margins of small towns and the former homeland of Ciskei, on the proximity of King Williamstown. And these are people who have actually purchased land from scrupulous traditional councils, and they've just moved freely, and it's a major phenomenon that's shaping human settlement in this part of the province, and I'm sure it's happening to other provinces, and it's something that still need to be studied quite extensively. Perhaps I should stop there on that comment.
All right, thank you, Prof. I'll just read the comment from Prof. Mabin. Thank you very much for the work, the paper, and the presentation and discussion. I've been doing a little work at Cradock, not in really the region about which you, Prof. Wotshela, have written here, but part of Chris Hani district of courts in Inkuba, Temba. Paper was just published in Transformation, and if people wanted, please contact Prof. Mabin. Very little has been written about similar transitions in such places. Pat Gibbs wrote very usefully on the period in Stekstrom in The Road to Democracy in South Africa, but that is rare. The breaks in community organizing, the dominance of externally controlled political hierarchies, and all sorts of other issues have led us, in my view, into tremendous difficulties in just about every local municipality and districts too. I hope to encourage more work on these themes and would like very much to discuss further. So I don't know if you have a comment on that very interesting comment.
Thanks, Kasonde. Not a lot, but let me just thank Prof. Marvin for that. I've seen his paper. I'm part of the recipient. I've just seen it a couple of days ago. I didn't factor in this presentation, but certainly I'll use it in expanding the research, especially it's so relevant with Cradock and being part of the Chris Hani district municipality. In fact, I heard, he may know this possibly more than I do, in that sort of transition stage, Cradock posed a very interesting challenge in the sense that at one stage it had sort of two parallel managers sort of running, one affiliating from the National Party and refusing to let go, and then the incoming ANC sort of had its own manager, and that ran for a couple of years before that kind of office entity was synchronized, just to show how difficult it was to integrate even these kind of small town kind of municipalities with party political affiliations at the time. But I'll read quite extensively his paper when I get the opportunity, and I'll incorporate it if I go on to publish this work.
Oh, great. So Prof. Mabin is just saying thank you, and you should be in touch with him.
Yes, I've got his email.
Oh, great. I don't know if there are any other questions. We're going to take a last round.
I see Njogu has a question in the chat.
Oh, sorry. I don't see it. Oh, I missed it. Okay. Let me read that question from Njogu. Thanks for the interesting presentation. I understand that your paper is the beginning of an ongoing project. Can you say more about some of the puzzles you are going to be focusing on as you go ahead? What remains unclear to you? Secondly, if you could speak a little about the challenges you mentioned at the beginning of tracing this history through the archives. I think just to give everyone a sense of that, before we got onto the seminar, Prof was sharing very interesting insights on how he's navigating the archives, because there are provincial archives, but you have to be very creative about how to access material. So Prof, if you could comment on Njogu's questions. Yes, thanks.
Thanks, Kasonde. Yes, thanks, Njogu. Of course, everything boils around the sources one can use for this kind of a project. And the Eastern Cape, as I think other provinces, has its own records and management repositories. The main one being in King Williamstown, which keeps, by and large, what used to be records of the former Ciskei, and even some of records that speak to what were the border districts that have outlined from the coastal East London stretching to Queenstown. The interesting thing about these records, of course, some that were really well catalogued and processed, and I think at one stage held by what used to be the Central Archives depository in Pretoria, were transferred to King Williamstown because they felt they more usable and the more pertinent or more speaking to this particular province. But the biggest challenge for the Eastern Cape is to process new records that start with the emergence of the province from 1994 or going forward. That process hasn't been managed quite adequately in as far as even transfer of records from respective government departments, associations, and whatever you can call. Some universities actually also keep quite a number of records from either NGOs, civic organizations that were very active in this part of the province, who mobilized communities, facilitated them around land struggles. For instance, I've written quite extensively on the Grahamstown Rural Committee that became the Border Rural Committee, and some of those records, well managed, they were deposited at Rhodes University, and now they have been kept very well, and some do speak even to records of earlier residents associations and up to getting to SANCO. From the official side, to go back, with the problem, of course, remains with the transfer and processing of records from government departments post-1994. As a result, one ends up having to even go beyond just using the archives repository and visit the actual departments themselves, because I'm not sure whether they're not conscious or cognitive of the fact that they need to transfer certain, or maybe there is no collection or systematic collection sort of system. There's been a bit written about this dilemma. And so you get records that have piled up since 1994, 95, continuing up to this period, still within this respective government. For this particular topic that deals with local government, some of those are now within what is called COCTA, that corporate government and traditional authority, that kind of government. And that COCTA has also inherited what used to be, in this particular province, Cape Provincial Administration papers that spoke strictly to what used to be areas outside homelands. In other words, what used to be white area of the Cape. Cradock, for instance, where Professor Marbin has done some work. I'm sure there could be even more records that were covered by the Cape Provincial Administration. So one, as he or she does this kind of work, you've got to navigate through a network of various sources that are located in different places. And of course, I haven't even started speaking about trying to locate surviving sort of individuals who would be the sort of overgrown comrades who were part of that SANCO Residents Association sort of movement. Some have passed on, but some would have been in their 30s during 1990s. They're well now in advanced stages, and one needs to sort of build very, very good verbatim around interviewing those. So it's quite a mission building this kind of research, but it's quite exciting. One needs time, of course. That's the challenge, and in this tricky period, of course, of movement controls and still prevalent COVID, it's a challenge, but it's a challenge worth taking on. Thanks.
Well, thank you so much, Prof. This was a wonderful seminar. I think people who have participated will agree with me that we have all learned so much, and look forward to this subfield growing. So thank you for taking your time to speak to us. Thank you to workshop attendees. You will receive further communication from the history workshop about future seminars. And you will find this particular seminar on YouTube in the next couple of days. Thank you.
Excellent. Thank you, Kasonde. And let me just say quickly, thank you for having me. It was a pleasure, and I'm glad I've been able to make a start on this, and I'm looking forward as to how it will progress moving forward. And thank you very much, and for the questions and discussions too.